you are a current Lightroom subscriber and you struggle with how to use the local adjustment tools inside the software, stick around. In this video tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use graduated filters. If there's something on the edge of your image that you need to fix or correct, graduated filters are just the ticket. Hi, I'm Darlene with Digital Photo Mentor. I teach beginning and intermediate photographers just like you how to improve their photography, right through from the capture process in the camera all the way through to the editing and final image. Make sure to stick around till the end of the video where I'll have a bonus tip for you. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Let's get started. To demonstrate graduated filters, I wanted to show you the progression from the original image, doing some basic edits in Lightroom, and then what happens after you apply the graduated filters. This image is perfect for this demonstration because there's a definite line in the middle of the image where the bottom part is dark and the top part is light. So we'll be able to do some adjustments to both halves of the image using the graduated filters. So this is what the original image looked like. And there's the finished image after basic adjustments and local adjustments. Let's take a look at the progression. This is the original image, and the only thing that I've done here is change the camera profile. So the original image is very contrasty, and there's a lot of bright areas and dark areas, as you can see represented on the histogram. If I look at areas of the image which are clipping, meaning no detail, you can see that there's lots of areas that are black with clipping, so they're highlighted in blue, and areas of white with no detail highlighted in red. To get the highlight warnings to show up, just press J on your keyboard. It's one of the keyboard shortcuts that are built into Lightroom that are really handy. So the first step to editing this image is to do some global or basic edits. Inside of the basic panel in Lightroom, that's the one at the top. So you can see that I am in the develop module, and we're over here on the right side under the basic panel. So anything you do in any of these tools along the right hand side here are what is called global edits. They apply to the entire image. So what I've done here is I've increased the whites a little bit, lowered the highlights a little bit, increased the shadows, decreased the blacks, and added a little bit of clarity and texture, as well as adjusted the white balance. Now you'll notice that when I click at the Alt Option key and the highlight slider, you can see the parts that are still clipping. And I've chosen to leave those clipping because if I take it all the way down, it makes the rest of the image look a little bit flat. So I want to do that as a local adjustment just to the top half of the image. So I'm going to undo that and leave highlights at -38. The next step is to do some local or targeted adjustments. What that means is that you are applying the edits only to part of the image. The tools available to do that are at the top here. You can see there's a graduated filter, and if you hover your mouse over it, that appears and it shows you graduated filter. That's the one we're going to be working on in this tutorial. The radial filter, and I have a separate video on that filter alone. And finally, the adjustment brush. So you can activate any of them just by simply clicking. So if I'm using the radial filter, you just click the little square filter. It looks like a drop-in filter that you put in front of your lens. You can also get to them from the tool menu at the top here, or using the keyboard shortcuts again. So the keyboard shortcut for the graduated filter is M. Now that's my method of choice for activating the filter. Before I go ahead and apply the graduated filters, let's take a look again at the finished image. So this is the look that I'm going for. The light is a lot more balanced between the top and the bottom half of the image. Hopping back over to our interim, now it's time to apply a graduated filter. So I'm going to click M on my keyboard, and you'll see that when that happens, I get this little plus sign or crosshairs. So what that does is it allows you to draw from the edge of the image in. So I'm going to start with the bottom half of the image because I want to lighten up the shadows a little bit. So I'm going to drag from the bottom, and I'm going to start about here up. Okay? Now, as you can do that, you see that I've already applied some settings. If those are not the settings you want, simply double click the word effect right here, and it resets everything. And when I go back over here, you can also see the point where I added the filter. And if I hover over it, you'll see that the mask shows up. Right now, mine is green. And the various adjustment tools that you have to change the size or fade of the filter and rotate it. So the middle one will rotate. And big tip here, use the handles at the sides of the line, not in the middle. Because if you try and rotate it, I'm just clicking and dragging here. If you try and do that in the middle, it kind of goes all wonky. Right? So it allows you to do much more smaller, finite adjustments, grabbing on the edge. Likewise, if you want to increase the fade of the filter, right, just grab one of the outside ones, and you can see that by pulling the lines further apart, we get this fade. So let me just adjust something to a great degree here and show you what that means. Okay, so I've done a huge adjustment to darken the picture, but it fades from this line to this line. If I bring the fade lines closer together, and I bring this up a little bit, you can see that the effect is almost a hard line. Okay, so the farther apart these two lines are, or these three lines, the more of a fade you'll get from one end to the other of this filter that you're applying. To move it around, you can see that I'm just grabbing the dot and moving it up or down, right? Now, if I wanted to completely invert it, I could rotate it all the way around, okay? Or I can have it apply to the sides. So you have the full ability to rotate it all the way around. I'm going to delete this one and show you one more trick to adding the filter. If you want to add one so that it's perfectly straight with the edge of the image, hold the Shift key down, and then when you drag down, it doesn't tilt it any direction. It's perfectly parallel to the edge where you started it, right? And then you can just go up and down. Right, so let's do that on the bottom. And I'm not going to make too much of a fade because I actually want it to apply to the people, and I'm going to tilt it a little bit so that it matches the heads. Lightroom remembers the last settings that you used and applies those again. So if you don't want those, remember, double click Effect. But in this case, this is exactly what I want. So it's done increased exposure, increased highlights, and increased whites. Now I do that on all of those things because if you just do the exposure, let me reset. Exposure is really affecting midtones, and it starts to look flat, okay, if I go too far. But if I bring up the whites as well, you see how that's affecting the crosswalk, right, which is what I want. If you want to make sure that you're not getting any clipping, just hit the J key. So you can see that I did get some clipping in the crosswalk. So I'm going to bring it back down, bring this back down a little bit, and I'm going to bring the shadows up, which is then going to lighten those darks. Now in doing so, you tend to flatten the image out, right? So I'm going to add a little bit of blacks back in just to keep the contrast. Okay, so keep in mind that when you're adding these filters, don't just do the exposure. You want to do a few in combination. So that looks pretty good. If you want to see what it's doing, there's a little toggle switch here. It's like a light switch, right? Turn it off and turn it on. So you can see that's done a really good job. Now the one thing, if I turn on this mask, so O key is for overlay, it will turn on the mask so you can see where it's applying. If I take it up a little bit higher to get all the people's heads, you can see that it's also hitting these lights in the background. So those are parts that I actually don't want it to apply to. So I'm going to turn on this range mask here at the bottom. So I'm still inside the mask tool for the graduated filter. And I'm going to choose Range Mask Luminance. What that does, make sure you check this off so you can see it. What that does is it allows you to adjust the mask so that it applies only to a certain part of the tonal range of the image. In this case, whites, which are on the right, and blacks, which are on the left, I want to remove it from the brightest areas. So if I drag this little slider, I'm going to grab it. You see how it starts to remove it from the crosswalk, but it also started to remove it from those white lights in the background. So I want to find a happy medium somewhere in there. So it's removed it from the brightest areas to make sure that I don't go over the top and brighten the areas that I'm actually going to try and darken with the next filter. So I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot. That looks good. All right, so now I can just check and see. Yes. If I go further, you'll see what happens, and it starts to just apply to the darkest areas, right? So be wary of doing things that start to look a little bit weird, right? This actually looks pretty good. So I'm lightening the mid-tones. I'm going to go to about 50 with that range mask. Next, I'm going to add another graduated filter, and I can do that just by getting the crosshairs and dragging another one, or click New up here. And this one's going to come down from the top. So I don't have to go, remember you don't want to start up here and drag it all the way down, because then you get a big range, right? Just when you drag it in, you can always move it down. Now I want, again, a tight fade, so I'm going to apply it to the top of the image. And now you can see it's applied the same settings. So I want to double click Effect to reset it. And this time I want to lower the highlights, right? So I'm going to lower those down. And I'm going to lower the exposure, which is midtones. And I'm going to keep the blacks low as well. So look what happens when I lower the blacks. Okay? Because it's really blown out and overly bright, just by bringing the blacks down, look at the contrast that I've gained and the color saturation. Okay, so that applies to your overall image as well. When you have no blacks in your image, you will lack color saturation. Okay, so I'm actually going to keep the highlights a little bit higher. I'm just going to go enough so that I'm not clipping, and I'm looking in here on these bright areas in the middle to make sure there's no whites clipping, like so. Then I'm going to do a range mask on this one again. And this time I'm going to take it off of the darkest areas, which is then going to help me keep it off the heads. You see that? Like so. So let's see how that looks. Right? Pretty good. So notice I didn't have to paint in anything or out anything. And I might do a little bit of adjustment on this guy, or just bring this up a little bit. So I didn't have to do any painting. Just that luminosity mask does a great job of keeping it from the areas where I don't want this to apply. Now I'm actually going to do one more graduated filter. So I'm going to click New again, and I'm going to bring one up from the bottom with quite a large fade this time. Double click to reset, and I'm just going to lower the exposure a little bit. So what that's going to do is to keep the viewer's eye in the image. By darkening the edge, because we've previously lightened everything, right? I'm going to keep the lightest part of the image, the intersection, and just lower the contrast or lower the highlights on this bottom part, right? So if I turn this whole thing off and on, you can see that those 3 graduated filters are doing a really great job. Click M to close it. And my last adjustment is going to be defringe, and see if I can get rid of some of this purple. There we go. Okay, so that's under lens corrections. That's a low global adjustment that you can make on your whole image. So that just gets rid of the purple glow around the outside. So once again, before and after. So that's a combination of doing some basic adjustments on the whole image and applying the local adjustments using the graduated filter. Before we move on to the next example, I want to show you one more quick trick to adjust the graduated filter if there's an area that you want it to not apply to. In this example, that is this area here, the signs on the building. I want them to be a little bit less gray looking. At the top of the mask tool, where I chose New before, I'm going to select Brush. What that allows you to do is to choose to either paint in or paint out on the existing areas of the mask. So I pressed O to show the mask. I'm going to erase, but not at 100%. I'm only going to go at about 50%. And I'm going to turn on this auto mask, because what that will do is, just get a little smaller brush, what that will do is Lightroom will help me find the edges. So as I paint inside this little light here area here, it's erasing the adjustments from this area, but it's not going outside the line. So the auto mask helps me stay inside the lines as if I was coloring. Then I'm going to do the same thing over here, just because I found they were getting a little bit too gray looking and I wanted them to pop a little more. See the difference that that made? And I'll just check that they're not clipping. Okay, they're clipping a little bit more adjustment there. Or I could go back if I erased too much and just paint a little back in, just like that. Oh, too much. So it's a really, really sort of fine line, and I'm just using this brush to paint in back the detail, like so. So the graduated filter, you can add multiple ones by clicking New. You can go back and edit any existing one by choosing Edit, or you can paint in and out areas of the mask specifically using that brush tool as part of the graduated filter. In this next example of a blue hour shot that I did in Venice, Italy, I want to show you how else you can apply the graduated filters other than just top and bottom. This image I've already done some basic edits to, and it looks pretty good, right? There's the before image, and there's where I'm at so far. Now let me show you after applying the graduated filters. See the difference? It's really darkened down the sky and brightened up the water and the tables on the side to bring the focus into the canal. So let me show you how I did that. So once again, I did some basic edits to tone things down and get to a point that I was pretty happy with the image to begin. So I'm going to click M on the keyboard to start the graduated filter. And the first one I'm going to do is actually on the corner over here. So you see this bottom left corner, there's a little bit of light peeking in, and I did some highlight adjustments on the image overall, but I didn't want to go too far because then it would lower the highlights in the rest of the image, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go diagonally with this one, okay? So you see the trick. Remember, we can rotate the graduated filters any direction. I'm going to reset and just tone down the highlights, and I might even do darken. Now see how it's creating this diagonal line on the building as well. So I don't want to darken the building. What can we use? Luminance range mask. Okay, so same thing again, and I'm just going to do it visually this time. So I'm dragging from the left, which means I'm removing this effect from the dark areas. I can show the mask for you if you want. Okay, so there's the filter. Then I remove it from the dark areas. You can start to see it only apply to that hot spot. So I just want it to apply to that little bit of light that's in the corner and not to the wall. Okay, so if I turn it off and on, you can see that there's a bit of a shadow there, but that's not too bad. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so see how that's toning down that corner so that your eye doesn't go there. Next thing I'm going to do is a similar one over on this side. So I'm going to drag this in. Now remember how I said Lightroom remembers the last settings you did. I did minus exposure and minus highlights. Okay, you could see it remembered. Now I'm going to rotate. So I'm doing the same thing on this corner. Same range mask again, luminance, and remove it from the dark areas. Because I just want to tone down those highlights a little bit on the edge of the image. Okay, see how that's doing a nice job? And I might even actually give it a little bit of blue because warm areas also draw your attention. So you're not limited to just exposure and brightness controls. You can actually alter the color of the image as well. So far, let's turn that off and on, and you can see that it's just correcting the edges so that your eye is drawn more into the center of the image. Now I'm going to apply one from the bottom, and I wanted to brighten this whole area in the middle here. And I'm going to drag this up, reset. Now this time I'm going to increase the shadows, right? And I'm going to increase the exposure. So look what that does to the water and everything there. Okay, now I don't want it to apply to the bright areas, and I want to make sure to keep some black to keep some contrast. So range mask, luminance, and this time I'm going to remove it from the light areas. Okay, so I'm only applying it in the canal area and in the restaurant chairs. So let's take a look at what that's doing. Okay, see how that's doing a nice job. And I might go even further on that, so it's only applying on the darkest parts. Just like that. Make sure I still have it highlighted. And you can switch back to any of the previous graduated filters you've already applied to edit them just by selecting the point. If you don't see the points, you might have to press H on your keyboard, which is hide. So hide or show. So the filters like to play hide and go seek with you. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Maybe a little more up on the shadows. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so see how now we've drawn the attention into the canal? And I'm going to do one more on the top. And I don't even need to fade it really. I'm just going to go make a really skinny one because I only want it to apply to the sky. Okay, I can spread it out if you want to see what's happening more, but it's coming down from the top. So double click. I want to lower the highlights, lower the exposure, and if I want to alter the color and make the sky a deeper blue, I can also even dial in more blue. Or you can use the color picker tool down at the bottom of this tool. It's got a square with an X on it. Okay, so you choose that and then you can literally pick any color. So if I wanted to make a sunset or do some funky colors in the sky, right, I could go more magenta, that kind of thing, but I just want a little bit more blue. Right? You can dial the saturation down. Make sure you don't go too over the top with your saturation. Okay? But once again, you'll notice where it's applying is it's also covering the buildings. Okay? So I don't want the buildings to be affected, but if I do it based on luminance, the sky is the similar tone to a lot of the building tones. So there's another range mask you can use called color. When you choose this one, it gives you a little eyedropper. So you click it, and then you select the color that you want it to affect. So I'm going to click the sky. And let me just turn on the overlay. So that's O. Now you can see that's also still affecting parts of the buildings. So I can try clicking different areas and see if that will help. Okay? By going to the darker blue. Or you can also adjust the amount. Now notice if I dial this to the left, I get less of the buildings and just the sky. Okay? So see how that's working, and hit escape to get the eyedropper to close. So let's take a look at all of those graduated filters applying together. Now when I'm turning this on and off, I'm looking in this area of the doorway here, and I'm not so happy because it's overdoing the shadows. So I'm going to go back here and adjust this a little bit and bring the shadows back down because I went too far, like so. So I'm always double checking my work and going back after. So I'm doing a turning it off and on, and I found that it was too sort of HDR looking over here, and checking to make sure that I haven't overdone anything. Okay, so overdone looks like when you have a halo around something, or if you have something that looks HDR. So if I take this one to a ridiculous extreme, okay, you can see that now there's no blacks in this area, and the doorway starts to look a little bit funky, especially if I get rid of the blacks. Okay, this is a look that you don't want because it's really, really flat now. Right, so I want to keep the blacks, not so much shadow bring up. Maybe bring the contrast down a little bit. That might help. And let's take a look at our mask. I'm going to go a little bit more like so. Always double check your work. Okay? So when you're happy with it, it's this little dance that you get to do. So you apply one, apply another, and then go and check your work. Hit M to close it. Let's see how close I got to the one I did previously. Almost identical. Okay, so this is the one I did before and the one that I just did. So pretty similar. I think I'm happier with the right side on the other image, but you can see that how easily I'm able to reproduce that. In this last example, you can see the image before I've applied the graduated filters and after. So I did the same thing here where I darkened the sidewalk and applied a luminance mask. So it only applied to the light areas. I can bring that up a little more so it's not on the water. So see how it's only applying to the sidewalk. And I also applied one over here to the corner. And I did that because notice the corner when I turn off the graduated filters, That part of the sky was a little bit brighter than the other side, and the color was different. You can see it's sort of purple over here, and it's more blue on the right. So when I turned this one on, I brought the highlights down to adjust the density. Let me turn the overlay off. And then I adjusted the color. See how I'm dialing in the color and it's affecting only that left area. And I'm just using the temperature and tint sliders to kind of try and match the right side of the image. And I find that's gone a little overly saturated. Bring that down a bit. And I used a wide fade on this one because I wanted it to gradually fade into the other part of the sky. Just press M to close the graduated filter. On this image, I actually applied a second local adjustment using the radial filter. I applied 2 to this little costume character by the canals to lighten him because he was in the shade or backlit. You can see what it looks like without the radial filters and then with. I have a full tutorial video on using radial filters. Just click the link in the upper right corner of the video now or the link below in the description to watch that video. Just keep in mind that if you ever have edits or corrections that you need to do to the center of your image, you'll need to use a radial filter or the adjustment brush because the graduated filter only applies from the edge of the image in towards the center. Remember I mentioned a bonus tip? So if you're happy with the settings that you've done on one of your graduated filters, you can save it as a preset. So how I did resetting everything, double-clicking the word effect, right next to that, you'll see the word custom. If you click on that and pull all the way down to the bottom, you can save the current settings as a preset. So this one here, as an example, I've applied things to brighten the shadows. Okay, so if I want to save that as a preset, I'll just click that and then give it a name. So I might call it Lift Dark Shadows and create it. Then next time when you go to apply one, you can just find it in the list. Click one of the videos on the screen now to learn more about how to use Lightroom tools like radial filters, graduated filters, and the adjustment brush. And for more training, tune into my weekly editing live stream where I process subscriber-submitted photos using my approach and my techniques. There's a link in the description below.